I was on a video call with my daughter. She was at her grandparents' for the weekend. Suddenly, the phone dropped. I heard screaming. My daughter's voice. "No, Grandpa, please." Then silence. I called back 47 times. No response. I drove 3 hours in the middle of the night. When I arrived, my daughter was sitting alone on the porch in the rain. Can you imagine the chilling horror of hearing your own child scream for help, miles away, through a phone that shouldn't even be connected? That night, I heard my 8-year-old daughter's panicked cries, then a terrifying impact, and finally, a deafening gunshot. My world, my entire universe, shattered into a million agonizing pieces. It was a typical Thursday night. Rain streamed down my apartment window, blurring the city lights. My coffee was cold, but I didn't care. Thursday nights were sacred because they belonged to my daughter, May. Exactly at 7:30, my phone chimed. There she was, my May, her gap-toothed grin infectious even through the screen. "Daddy, look what Grandma made me," she chirped, holding up a lumpy clay sculpture that was either a very confused dog or a valiant attempt at a horse. My heart swelled. "That's amazing, sweetheart. For your school project." "Aha. Mrs. Peterson said we could make anything about animals. Grandma's letting me use her kiln this weekend." This weekend. That familiar knot tightened in my stomach. It was her monthly visit to her maternal grandparents, Daryl and Melline Hudson, 3 hours north in Millbrook. I'd fought tooth and nail against it during the divorce 2 years ago, but Christie's lawyer painted me as the obsessive, controlling ex-husband. The judge sided with family stability, which apparently meant May spending every third weekend with the Hudsons. "Where's Grandma now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light, masking the unease. "Making dinner. Grandpa's." May's eyes flickered off-screen, her smile faltering. "He's in his study." Daryl Hudson. That man always unsettled me, even back when Christy and I were dating in college. He was a retired high school principal, respected in his small town, always wearing a cardigan and wire-rimmed glasses that screamed, "Harmless Grandpa." But I'd caught glimpses of something else in those watery blue eyes, a coldness, a flicker of something truly dark, whenever he thought no one was watching. "You having fun otherwise, baby?" I pressed. "Yeah. Tomorrow, Grandma is taking me to the—" May stopped mid-sentence. I heard a door open in the background, then May's face went carefully neutral. "Hi, Grandpa." "Hello there, little May." Daryl's voice purred through the speaker. That false warmth, that sickening, sugary tone I'd heard 1,000 times. "Still talking to your father?" "Just saying good night," May said, a little too quickly. "Your grandmother needs help in the kitchen. Run along now." It wasn't a suggestion. "Okay. Bye, Daddy. Love you." "Love you too, sweetheart. I'll see you." The phone shifted. I caught a glimpse of May's bedroom ceiling, heard her footsteps retreating. The call didn't end. The phone must have fallen onto her bed, still transmitting. I almost hung up, thinking it was an invasion of privacy. But something held me captive. Then May's voice again, more distant. "Grandpa, I was still talking to. I said your grandmother needs you." Daryl's voice had changed. The gentleness was gone, replaced by an unnerving command. "Don't make me tell you twice." My hand tightened on my phone. "Hang up. Kenny, hang up." But I couldn't. Silence. A long, chilling silence. Then May again, even further away. "I'm going. I'm going." "Not that way. Come here first." Daryl's voice was barely audible now, a low rumble of insidious suggestion. "I want to show you something in my study." "But Grandma said." "Your grandmother doesn't need to know everything, does she? We've talked about this, May. Our little secrets." My blood turned to ice. May's voice was small, choked with fear. "I don't want to. Please, Grandpa. Daddy's waiting." "Your daddy isn't here. And if you tell him about our special time, May, well, you know what happens. You don't want your parents fighting again, do you? You don't want to be the reason they suffer." I was on my feet, heart hammering against my ribs. grabbing my car keys with my free hand, still listening. Please, May's voice cracked. I don't like it when. Hush now, just for a little while. Be a good girl. I ran for the door, phone pressed to my ear. My pounding footsteps echoed in the stairwell. I burst into the parking garage, fumbling with my key fob. Through the phone, I heard a door close. Then May's voice, clearer now, panicked. No, Grandpa. Please, I said I don't want to. You're being dramatic, May, just like your mother. Now hold still. No, May screamed. Stop it. Daddy. Daddy, help. Then the sickening sound of impact. Plastic hitting hardwood. The phone had fallen. I heard scuffling. May's sobs. And then Daryl Hudson's voice, all pretense gone, replaced with pure, unadulterated rage. You little bitch. After everything I've done for you, after I've been so patient. Get away from me, May shrieked. My tires squealed as I peeled out of the garage. I switched the call to my car's speakers, one hand on the wheel, the other snatching my second phone to dial 911. Grandma, Grandma, help. May's screams turned desperate. Then, Melline Hudson's voice, sharp and sudden. Daryl, what is going on in? She stopped. A pause that stretched too long, too full of dread. Oh my God. Daryl, what did you? Shut up, Melline. This doesn't concern you. Your face. May's. Sweetheart. Come here. Stay back. Daryl snapped. All of you just. A crash. Something heavy hitting the floor. Melline screamed. May sobbed. Then a sound I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. A single, deafening crack that could only be a gunshot. Melline's scream cut off abruptly. May's voice, thin with terror. Grandma, Grandma, look what you made me do, Daryl said, his voice hollow, chillingly calm. Look what you made me do, May. This is your fault. Your father's fault. If you'd just been good. Monster. You're a monster. May sobbed. Another gunshot. Then silence. Terrible, complete silence. May? My voice cracked. May? Baby, answer me. Nothing. The line stayed open, but all I heard was my own ragged breathing through the car's speakers. May, please, baby, please answer me. May! The silence stretched on, mocking me. I called her name over and over, my voice wild with terror. My other hand fumbled with my second phone. The 911 operator answered. 911, what's your emergency? My daughter. I could barely speak. My daughter's in danger. There's been a shooting. Shots fired. 2247, Oakwood Lane, Millbrook. Send everyone. Send everyone now. I gave them the details in broken fragments, my foot pressed to the accelerator, the speedometer climbing past 90 as I flew down the empty highway. Rain hammered my windshield. The operator kept asking questions I couldn't answer. Was my daughter injured? Didn't know. Who fired the shots? Daryl Hudson. Was the shooter still armed? Probably. Was anyone else in the house? Not anymore. I ended the call and tried May's phone again. It rang and rang and rang. No answer. I tried 46 more times over the next 2.5 hours, my mind conjuring increasingly horrific scenarios. May's face, her gap-toothed smile, her small hand in mine walking to the park, her voice asking if I'd come to her school play, her absolute trust that I would always protect her. And I'd failed. I'd heard her screaming for help, and I was 3 hours away. The rain intensified as I crossed into Millbrook County. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the winding country road to the Hudson house. No other cars. No sirens. Where were the police? I called them over 2 hours ago. I skidded to a stop in front of 2247, Oakwood Lane at 10:47 p.m. The house sat back from the road, a 2-story colonial that looked deceptively peaceful in the storm. Lights blazed from every window. The front door hung open. No police cars, no ambulance, nothing. I killed the engine and ran through the rain, my shoes splashing through puddles. I was halfway to the porch when I saw her. May. She sat on the top step, alone in the downpour. Her pink pajamas were soaked through, plastered to her small frame. Her hair hung in wet tangles around her face. She stared straight ahead, unnaturally still, her arms wrapped around her knees. "May!" I sprinted up the steps. "Baby, are you?" I stopped, washed by the rain, but still visible, trailing down the porch steps from the open door. Diluted pink rivulets running through the grooves between the wooden boards. May slowly turned her head to look at me. Her eyes were wrong. Too wide. Too empty. The eyes of someone who'd seen the end of the world. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Please don't look inside." I dropped to my knees in front of her, my hands hovering, afraid to touch her, afraid she might shatter. "Are you hurt? Did he hurt you?" She didn't answer, just stared at me with those hollow eyes. "May, sweetheart, I need to know if you're hurt." "I'm not hurt," she said, her voice flat, mechanical. "Not the way you mean." My hands were shaking. I made myself breathe, made myself focus. Okay, baby. I'm gonna check inside, and then we're leaving. We're going right to the hospital. Don't look, Daddy. Please don't look." But I had to. I had to know. I stood and walked through the open doorway into the Hudson house. The smell hit me first. Copper and gunpowder and something else, something worse. The foyer was pristine. Nothing out of place. Family photos lined the walls. Smiling faces, frozen in happier times. Christy's high school graduation. May's 3rd birthday party. Daryl and Meline's 40th anniversary. I followed the blood trail down the hallway. It led to Daryl Hudson's study. The door was ajar. I pushed it open. Meline Hudson lay on her back near the desk, her eyes open and unseeing, a hole in the center of her chest. Blood pooled beneath her, soaking into the Persian rug. Her hand was outstretched toward the door, as if she'd been reaching for the hallway, reaching for May. Daryl Hudson sat in his leather desk chair, slumped forward over his antique desk. The right side of his head was missing. A revolver lay on the floor near his dangling hand. Blood and brain matter spattered the wall behind him, covering his framed teaching awards and family photographs. On the desk in front of him, barely visible beneath his left arm, was a composition notebook. I stepped closer, my stomach roiling. The notebook was open, filled with Daryl's precise handwriting. The last entry was dated today. She threatened to tell. After all these years, she threatened to destroy everything. I gave her opportunities. I was patient. But children today, they don't understand gratitude. They don't understand sacrifice. It's May's fault. Christy's fault for raising her wrong. For leaving her with me. The irony. Christy was the perfect one. The obedient one. She learned. But this one, this May, she fights. She cries. She makes such a fuss. Meline finally saw tonight. Finally walked in at the wrong moment. Saw what I had to do to teach May proper respect. The look on Meline's face. Betrayal, disgust. As if I was the monster. As if I hadn't built this family, this life, this perfect image. She was gonna call the police. She made me do it. They all made me do it. My vision blurred. My hands clenched into fists so tight my nails drew blood from my palms. The notebook continued, but I couldn't read anymore. Couldn't process the words that made it clear this hadn't been the first time. That Christy, his ex-wife, May's mother, had been a victim too. The monster had documented everything. His justifications, his twisted logic, his complete lack of remorse. And then he'd taken the coward's way out. I stumbled backward out of the study, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I made it to the hallway before I vomited, my body rejecting what my mind had witnessed. When I could stand again, I wiped my mouth and walked back to the porch. May hadn't moved, still sitting in the same position, rain streaming down her face. I scooped her into my arms. She didn't resist, just let herself be lifted like a rag doll. I carried her down the steps toward my car, careful not to slip on the wet stairs. "Where are the police?" I asked, more to myself than to her. "They came," May said quietly against my shoulder. "2 officers. They talked to me, asked what happened. I told them. I stopped walking." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That Grandpa was doing bad things to me. That Grandma saw that he shot her. That he shot himself. Her voice remained flat, emotionless. They went inside. Then they came back out and made some calls. They said more people were coming. They said I should wait for my father. They just left you sitting in the rain? I felt a fresh wave of sick rage. I told them to go. I wanted to wait alone. May finally looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. I didn't want to be in that house anymore, Daddy. Not ever again. I held her tighter, my throat closing up. You never have to be. Promise, baby. Never again. I settled her into the passenger seat of my car, buckled her in, then grabbed the emergency blanket from my trunk and wrapped it around her. She didn't speak, just stared out the windshield at the house with its blazing windows and open door. As I pulled away, I caught sight of flashing lights in my rearview mirror. More police finally arriving. An ambulance, a fire truck. Too late. Hours too late. But May was alive. That was all that mattered right now. As we drove through the storm back toward the city, back toward some semblance of safety, my mind was already working, already planning. Because as the shock began to recede, one thought crystallized with diamond-hard clarity. Daryl Hudson had gotten off easy. One bullet, instant death. No suffering. No justice. And if that notebook revealed what I suspected, that this had gone on for months, maybe years, that his ex-wife Christy might have known, might have been a victim herself and stayed silent, then there were more people responsible. More people who'd let this happen. The law would handle the immediate aftermath, the investigation, the reports. But I, Kenny Ogden, would handle everything else. I glanced at May, huddled in her blanket, trembling despite the car's heat. My daughter. My responsibility to protect. I failed once. I wouldn't fail again. The rain continued to fall as we drove through the night, leaving Millbrook and its horrors behind. But I knew we couldn't really leave it behind. Not yet. Not until everyone who'd enabled Daryl Hudson's darkness had paid in full. 3 days later, I sat in the sterile waiting room of Dr. Helen Yates's office while May attended her third emergency therapy session. The child psychologist had been recommended by the hospital, a specialist in trauma and abuse. May had barely spoken since that night, moving through our apartment like a ghost. My phone buzzed. Christy again. She'd been calling nonstop since the news broke. I'd been sending her to voicemail, not ready to hear whatever justifications or excuses she might offer. But I needed answers. Eventually, I would need to confront her, just not yet. Instead, I opened the email from Detective Marvin Richardson, the lead investigator on the case. Richardson had been professional, but not particularly warm, treating the whole thing as an open-and-shut murder-suicide. Tragic, he'd called it, but at least the perpetrators saved the taxpayers some money. The email contained a preliminary forensics report. I forced myself to read it. Each word, a knife in my gut. Melline Hudson, cause of death, gunshot wound to the chest. Time of death estimated at 7:05 p.m. Daryl Hudson. Cause of death, self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Time of death estimated at 7:05 and 40 seconds p.m. The notebook found on the scene had been entered into evidence. Richardson noted that it contained disturbing content suggesting long-term abuse of a minor, but didn't elaborate. The district attorney's office was reviewing it to determine if any other parties should be investigated. My jaw clenched. Disturbing content. That's what they called a pedophile's confession journal. The report continued with forensic details about the crime scene, bullet trajectories, blood spatter patterns, clinical descriptions of horror. Then, buried in the final paragraph, a note that made my blood run cold. Physical examination of the minor victim confirmed signs consistent with historical sexual abuse over an extended period. Child Protective Services has been notified. The minor's mother, Christy Hudson, has requested custody. Given the lack of evidence of her direct involvement and her status as the biological parent, this request will likely be granted pending a standard CPS review. I read the paragraph 3 times, my fury building with each pass. Christy wanted custody. The same Christy whose father had abused our daughter for God knows how long. The same Christy who'd insisted on those monthly weekends in Millbrook, who dismissed my concerns as paranoia and overprotectiveness. My phone buzzed again. Christy. I answered this time. Kenny, finally. I've been trying to reach you for days. You want custody? My voice was ice. A pause. I'm her mother, Kenny. She needs her mother right now. She needs her mother? I stood up, my voice rising. An older couple in the waiting room looked over, startled. I lowered my volume but not my intensity. Where was her mother when your father was abusing her? Where were you, Christy? I didn't know. You think I would have let that happen if I knew? He was my father, Kenny. My father. How long? What? How long did you know the truth, Christy? I've read his notebook. I know he did this before. I know you were. I couldn't say it. Couldn't voice the suspicion that had been growing since I'd read those entries. How long? The silence on the other end stretched. Too long. When Christy finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. It wasn't like with me. What he did to me was different. I was older and he stopped when I got married. He promised he stopped. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. You knew. You knew what he was capable of, and you sent May there anyway. No, I thought. I convinced myself it was different. That he'd changed. That he wouldn't. Her voice broke into sobs. I wanted to believe he loved her like a normal grandfather. I wanted my father to be the man I pretended he was. I was wrong. I was so fucking wrong, Kenny. You don't get her back. My voice was steady now, cold with certainty. I don't care what the law says. I don't care what CPS decides. You will never be alone with May again. You can't do that. I'm her mother. I have rights. You gave up those rights when you sacrificed our daughter to protect your illusion of a happy family. I hung up. My hands were shaking. I wanted to throw the phone, wanted to scream, wanted to break something. Instead, I sat back down and forced myself to breathe, to think. Dr. Yates's door opened, and May emerged, her hand in the older woman's. The therapist's expression was carefully neutral, but I caught the concern in her eyes. Mr. Ogden, could I speak with you for a moment? I nodded. May sat down with a coloring book while I followed Dr. Yates into her office. I need to be direct with you, Dr. Yates said once the door closed. May's trauma is severe. The abuse was systematic and occurred over approximately 18 months. She has PTSD, possible dissociative episodes, and a profound trust violation that will take years to process. I nodded, my throat tight. I'm also concerned about what she told me today regarding her mother. Dr. Yates pulled out her notes. May said that 6 months ago, she tried to tell her mother something was wrong, that she didn't want to go to Grandpa's house anymore. According to May, her mother told her to stop being dramatic and that Grandpa was just affectionate. Does that align with what you know? I suspected Christy knew something. Now I'm certain. I met the therapist's eyes. She called me today. She wants custody. Dr. Yates's expression hardened. Over my dead body. I'll be submitting my professional recommendation to CPS and the court. May needs stability, safety, and a parent she can trust. Right now, Mr. Ogden, you're the only one who fits that description. Thank you. I stood. Is there anything else I should know? Yes. Dr. Yates hesitated. May mentioned something today that concerns me. She said she wants her grandfather to hurt forever. That dying was too easy for him. She's 8 years old, and she's thinking about revenge. She fixed me with a penetrating stare. I need to know that you're going to help her process these feelings in a healthy way. That you're not going to validate them or, God forbid, model that behavior. I held her gaze. I want what's best for May, whatever that takes. It wasn't a lie. I did want what was best for May. And what was best for May was ensuring that everyone who'd enabled her abuse faced consequences. Real consequences. Not the kind that came from courts and lawyers and official reports. The kind that came from a father who would do anything to protect his daughter. That night, after May finally fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and the copies of documentation I'd obtained from Detective Richardson. The detective had been surprisingly forthcoming, perhaps because he was a father himself, perhaps because he understood my desperate need for answers. The notebook, the forensics reports, May's statement to police, the CPS preliminary assessment, and most damningly, emails between Daryl Hudson and several of his former colleagues from the high school where he'd been principal. I read through them systematically, building a picture that grew darker with each passing hour. Daryl hadn't been working alone. Not completely. The emails referenced a network of individuals, coded language about shared interests and private gatherings. Names appeared repeatedly: Gregory Watkins, Daryl's former vice principal; Lel Atkinson, the school district superintendent; Ronald Davenport, a child psychologist who'd assessed May 2 years ago after Christie's divorce attorney had ordered an evaluation. I had met Davenport. The man had declared May perfectly happy and well-adjusted, had seen nothing to indicate abuse or trauma, had submitted a report supporting Christie's custody arrangement that included monthly visits to Millbrook. Now I understood why. Davenport had been protecting Daryl, protecting the network. My phone rang. An unknown number. I answered. "Mr. Ogden, this is Bradley Clean. I am an attorney representing certain interests related to your former father-in-law's estate." My instincts flared. "What do you want?" "I understand this is a difficult time. I want you to know that my clients are deeply sympathetic to your daughter's situation. We'd like to offer a settlement, generous compensation, in exchange for your agreement not to pursue civil litigation or make public statements about Mr. Hudson's private matters." Private matters? My voice was flat. "You mean his documented history of child abuse?" A pause. "The documentation you're referring to is subject to legal privilege and ongoing investigation. Making unfounded accusations could be considered defamation." "Who are your clients, Mr. Clean?" "I'm not at liberty to say, but they're prepared to offer $2 million, placed in a trust for your daughter's future. All you need to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement and agree not to cooperate with any journalists or authors who might seek to sensationalize this tragedy." I understood. The network was circling the wagons. They wanted to buy my silence before I could expose them. "I need to think about it," I said. "Of course. I'll email you the preliminary documents. But Mr. Ogden, time is of the essence. The offer expires in 72 hours. The call ended. I sat in the darkness, my mind racing. $2 million. Money that could pay for May's therapy, her college, her future. Money that could buy us a new life, far away from Millbrook and its horrors. All I had to do was stay silent. Let the dead keep their secrets. Let the living escape justice. I looked down at my hands. Hands that had held my daughter as she trembled. Hands that had carried her out of that house. Hands that could do something with the information I'd gathered. Or hands that could sign a piece of paper and take the money. I thought of May, lying in her bed, plagued by nightmares. Thought of the hollow look in her eyes. Thought of all the other children who might encounter Gregory Watkins, Lel Atkinson, Ronald Davenport, and whoever else was part of Daryl Hudson's network. I opened my laptop and began typing a response to Bradley Clean. "I'll consider your offer, but first I need some questions answered. Who else knew? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, who else in your network is still actively abusing children?" I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I opened a new browser window and started searching for something else. Private investigators, security experts, people who specialized in finding information that others wanted to keep hidden. Because whatever happened next, I needed leverage. I needed to know exactly who I was dealing with and what they were capable of. And then I needed to decide. Take the money and run, or burn it all down and damn the consequences. I looked at May's closed bedroom door, thinking of my little girl who said dying was too easy for the monster who'd hurt her. Maybe she was right. Maybe some people deserve to hurt before they fall. The next morning, I dropped May at Dr. Yates's office for her daily session and drove across the city to meet Calvin Humphrey, a private investigator whose name had come up repeatedly in my late-night research. Humphrey operated out of a nondescript office above a hardware store, the kind of place designed not to be remembered. Mr. Ogden. Humphrey was in his 50s, weathered and competent-looking, with the careful eyes of someone who'd seen too much. "I read about what happened. I'm sorry. I need information," I said without preamble. I slid a USB drive across the desk. Everything in there is either public record or given to me by the police. I need you to dig deeper. Find out who these men are, what they've been doing, and how they've gotten away with it." Humphrey plugged in the drive and spent several minutes reviewing the contents, his expression growing darker. Finally, he looked up. "This is a fucking nightmare. You know that, right? These aren't small-time perverts. We're talking about a former school superintendent, a licensed psychologist, a prominent attorney. People with resources and connections." "I know. What exactly are you planning to do with this information?" I met his eyes. "Make sure they can't hurt anyone else." Humphrey studied me for a long moment. "I've got 2 daughters myself, 10 and 13. I read what happened to yours and I barely slept. So, I'm going to be straight with you. I'll find everything you want to know. But what you do with it, that's on you. I don't know. I don't want to know. And I can't be subpoenaed about things I don't know. We clear?" "Crystal. My rate is $200 an hour plus expenses. This kind of investigation could take weeks. Could cost 40,000, maybe more if I have to pay for certain specialized services." I thought of the $2 million Bradley Clean had offered. Blood money, but money that could be put to better use than lining the pockets of enablers and abusers. "Do it. Whatever it costs, I need names, addresses, patterns, evidence. Everything. You'll have it." Humphrey stood and extended his hand. I shook it. "One more thing, Mr. Ogden. When this is done, I never met you. This conversation never happened." "Understood." I spent the next 2 weeks in a strange limbo. Days were consumed with May's therapy appointments, school meetings to arrange her extended absence, consultations with family court attorneys about Christie's custody challenge. Nights were spent reviewing Calvin Humphrey's reports as they trickled in, each one more damning than the last. Gregory Watkins, the former vice principal, had been quietly dismissed from 2 previous schools for inappropriate conduct with students. Both times, settlements had been reached and NDAs signed. He now worked as an educational consultant, giving him access to children across multiple districts. Lel Atkinson, the superintendent, had used his position to cover up several allegations against teachers and administrators over the past 15 years. He'd also taken multiple consulting trips to Southeast Asia, destinations known for sex tourism. Immigration records showed Daryl Hudson had accompanied him on 3 of those trips. Ronald Davenport, the psychologist, specialized in custody evaluations. Humphrey had found 6 cases where Davenport had assessed children later proven to have been abused, and in each case, he'd found nothing wrong. He'd also been Daryl Hudson's patient, receiving therapy for anxiety and depression. The therapeutic relationship had been undisclosed in May's evaluation. A massive ethical violation that alone could destroy Davenport's career. Bradley Clean, the attorney, wasn't just representing the network. He was part of it. Humphrey had uncovered sealed juvenile records from 30 years ago when Clean had been charged with soliciting a minor. The charges had been dropped due to insufficient evidence after the victim recanted. The victim had later died by suicide at age 19, and there were others. More names, more connections. A web of predators and enablers who'd protected each other for decades. Christie appeared in the network's orbit, too, though not as a perpetrator. Humphrey's report included old therapy records that Daryl had kept, his own daughter's records from when she was a teenager, documenting her abuse, and his treatment plan to keep her compliant and silent. Reading them made me physically ill. My ex-wife hadn't just been a complicit parent. She'd been a victim so thoroughly broken that she'd learned to perpetuate the cycle, offering up her own daughter rather than face the truth about her family. I didn't know whether that made me hate her more or less. On the 14th day after the incident, Bradley Clean called again. "Mr. Ogden, you've been avoiding my calls. The deadline for our offer has passed. My clients are prepared to withdraw." "Tell your clients I want $5 million, I interrupted. "Not 2.5, and I want individual names. Everyone who's contributing to the settlement. Everyone who wants my silence." "That's not how this works." "That's exactly how it works. You want to buy my silence? Fine, but I'm not selling cheap. $5 million, full disclosure of who's paying, and a detailed accounting of why they're so desperate to keep this quiet. You have 48 hours. After that, I take everything I know to the FBI and every news outlet in the country. I hung up before Clean could respond. 2 hours later, Calvin Humphrey called. Whatever you just did, you rattled some cages. I've got people following me. Professional surveillance, not amateurs. Can you handle it? Yeah, but it's going to cost you. I need to bring in some specialists. Make sure my security's airtight. Another 10 grand minimum. Do it. And Calvin, be careful. Always am. I stood at my apartment window watching the street below. A dark sedan sat parked across the street. Slightly too obvious to be a real threat. A message, we're watching you. Good. Let them watch. Let them worry. Because I was done playing defense, done reacting, done letting these people control the narrative. It was time to go on offense. That night, after May was asleep, I composed an email. Not to Bradley Clean or the network. To someone else entirely. Vince Shepherd ran a true crime podcast that had recently exposed a ring of corrupt police officers in a neighboring state. He was aggressive, unafraid of powerful interests, and had a track record of bringing down people who thought they were untouchable. I attached everything. The full investigative file from Calvin Humphrey, copies of Daryl's notebook, the forensic reports, the emails, the travel records, the pattern of covered-up allegations. Everything that painted a complete picture of the network. Subject line, The Millbrook Network. How a retired principal built a child abuse ring under everyone's noses. My finger hovered over the send button. This was the point of no return. Send this email and Bradley Clean's settlement offer would evaporate. The network would lawyer up, go into damage control. They'd come after me with everything they had. Lawsuits, intimidation, maybe worse. But May would be safe. Because once the story broke, once the spotlight turned on these men, they'd be too busy trying to save themselves to hurt anyone else. I thought about the $2 million, the $5 million. Money that could change May's life. Then I thought about all the other children. The ones Daryl Hudson had hurt before May. The ones Gregory Watkins was still positioned to abuse. The ones who would be evaluated by Ronald Davenport and sent into dangerous situations. My daughter had said dying was too easy for her grandfather. But I wasn't interested in easy. I was interested in justice. I clicked send. The story broke 72 hours later. Vince Shepherd's podcast released a 3-part special series titled The Millbrook Network, and within 6 hours, every major news outlet had picked it up. The allegations were too specific, too well documented to ignore. Gregory Watkins was arrested within 24 hours on charges of possession of child pornography. Evidence Shepherd's team had turned over to authorities. His computers contained thousands of images and videos, some featuring children from his own schools. Lel Atkinson resigned from his position as superintendent amidst calls for a federal investigation into the school district's handling of abuse allegations. His passport was flagged, and he was placed on the no-fly list while investigators examined his travel history. Ronald Davenport lost his license to practice psychology. Multiple former patients came forward with complaints about his unethical conduct and biased evaluations. Criminal charges were pending. Bradley Clean was placed on administrative leave from his law firm while the State Bar investigated his involvement. The sealed juvenile records from his past were mysteriously leaked to the press. His career was effectively over, and the story kept growing. More victims came forward. More names were added to the investigation. What had started as one retired principal's crimes became a sprawling exposé of systemic failure, corruption, and deliberate cover-ups spanning 3 decades. I watched it all unfold from my apartment, holding May's hand as we sat on the couch. She didn't fully understand the news reports, didn't grasp the magnitude of what was happening, but she understood that people were finally listening, finally believing, finally acting. "Daddy," May said quietly during a commercial break, "are the bad men going to jail?" "Yes, baby. All of them." "Good." She leaned against my shoulder. "Grandpa should have gone to jail, too. Not just stopped." "I know. You made this happen," May said, looking up at me. "Dr. Yates said I'm not supposed to think about revenge. But you did it anyway, didn't you?" I hesitated, weighing my response. Finally, I decided on honesty. This wasn't revenge, sweetheart. Revenge is about hurting people because you're hurt. This was about justice. About making sure no one else gets hurt the way you were hurt. May considered this. What's the difference? Revenge makes you feel better for a little while, but then it just makes you emptier. Justice makes the world safer. Safer is better. Oh, May was quiet for a moment. Did it make you feel better? I thought about it. About the satisfaction I'd felt when the arrest started. About the grim determination that had carried me through the investigation. About the nights I'd spent consumed with rage and the need to make someone, anyone, pay for what had happened to my daughter. A little, I admitted. But what really makes me feel better is knowing you're safe. And that you're going to heal. That's what matters most. May nodded and turned back to the TV. I kissed the top of her head, marveling at her resilience. She had nightmares still, jumped at loud noises, clung to me in crowded places. But she was here. She was alive. She was talking about it, processing it with Dr. Yates, slowly beginning to rebuild trust in the world. It would take years, maybe a lifetime, but we had time now. My phone buzzed. Christy again. She'd been calling constantly since the story broke, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to accusatory to desperate. I had listened to exactly one of them. The one where she'd sobbed about how she'd tried to protect May the only way she knew how, by pretending nothing was wrong. It hadn't made me hate her less, but it had helped me understand her. I sent the call to voicemail. Not today. Maybe not ever. Some damage couldn't be repaired. Only endured. Another call came in immediately after. Calvin Humphrey. You watching the news? Humphrey asked. All day. You did it. You actually fucking did it. Do you know how many people tried to expose these guys over the years? How many parents, teachers, social workers? They all got shut down, paid off, or intimidated into silence. But you actually brought them down. We brought them down, I corrected. I couldn't have done it without your investigation. Yeah, well, my invoice is in the mail. $37,000. Worth every penny if you ask me. I laughed. A sound I hadn't made in weeks. I'll pay it gladly. One more thing, Humphrey said, his tone shifting. You've got protection, right? These guys still have friends. People who might decide you're a threat that needs to be eliminated. I've thought about that. Think harder. I'm serious, Ogden. Get a security system. Vary your routines. Maybe consider relocating for a while. I'm not running from them. It's not running. It's being smart. You've got a daughter to protect, remember? I glanced at May, still absorbed in the TV. You're right. I'll take precautions. After the call ended, I did exactly that. I hired a security consultant to assess my apartment and install a comprehensive alarm system. I changed my phone number and May's. I enrolled May in a new school under a slightly modified name. May Hudson Ogden became May Ogden, dropping her mother's surname entirely. The family court case resolved itself without a trial. Christy withdrew her custody petition after her own attorney advised her that fighting it would only result in public testimony about her knowledge of the abuse. CPS recommended full custody to me with supervised visitation for Christy, 2 hours per month at a neutral location with a social worker present. Christy attended the first visitation. May refused to see her. The second visitation, May agreed to come, but wouldn't speak to her mother beyond monosyllables. By the third visitation, Christy stopped showing up. She left a voicemail for me, explaining that she was entering a residential treatment program to deal with her own trauma. She would respect May's needs and give her space. Maybe someday they could have a relationship, but not now. I saved the voicemail, just in case May wanted to hear it someday. Just in case my daughter ever needed proof that her mother had, in her own broken way, tried to do the right thing in the end. Months passed. The investigation continued to expand. Federal prosecutors built cases against 12 individuals tied to the network. 3 had already taken plea deals in exchange for testimony against the others. Gregory Watkins's trial was set for the following spring. He was facing 43 counts of child exploitation. His attorney tried to argue that Watkins was a victim of Daryl Hudson's manipulation, that he'd been groomed himself, The argument fell flat when prosecutors revealed that Watkins had abused children before ever meeting Daryl. Lel Atkinson fled the country 2 days before he was scheduled to be indicted. He'd made it as far as Costa Rica before being arrested at the border trying to enter Nicaragua. Extradition proceedings were underway. Ronald Davenport was out on bail, living in his brother's basement, monitored by an ankle bracelet. His trial was scheduled after Watkins's. He'd aged 20 years in the 6 months since the story broke. His hair gone white, his face gaunt. I had seen him once by accident in the grocery store. Davenport had recognized me immediately, his eyes widening with terror before he'd abandoned his cart and fled. Good. Let him be afraid. Let him feel a fraction of the fear May had felt. Bradley Clean had been disbarred and was facing criminal charges for obstruction of justice. He'd attempted suicide 3 months after the scandal broke, but had survived. He was currently in psychiatric care, awaiting trial. I took no pleasure in these outcomes, no satisfaction in the destruction of these men's lives. But I felt a deep, abiding sense of rightness, of justice served. May's 8th birthday arrived in late November. She wanted a small party, just me, Dr. Yates, and 2 girls from her new school she'd cautiously befriended. No family, no mother, no grandparents, just the people she trusted. We celebrated in the apartment with cake and board games. May smiled, genuinely smiled, when she blew out her candles. Her wish, she told me later, was for the nightmares to stop. They hadn't yet, but they were coming less frequently. And May was learning to fight them, to remind herself that she was safe, that the monster was gone and couldn't hurt her anymore. After the party, after May's friends went home and Dr. Yates said goodnight with a warm hug and a reminder to call if we needed anything, I tucked my daughter into bed. "Daddy," May said as I turned out the light. "Thank you." "For what, baby? For believing me? For saving me? For making the bad men stop?" My throat tightened. "You don't have to thank me for that. That's my job. That's what fathers do." "Not all fathers." May's voice was very small in the darkness. "Some fathers are the bad men. I know, but I'm not that kind of father. I'm never going to be that kind of father. I know." May was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you think I'll ever be normal again?" The question gutted me. I sat back down on the edge of her bed, finding her hand in the dark. "Sweetheart, you're already normal. What happened to you wasn't normal. But you're brave and smart and strong. And yes, you've been hurt. But hurt people can heal. Dr. Yates says so. And I believe her. I believe in you." "Okay." May squeezed my hand. "I believe you." I sat with her until she fell asleep, then sat a little longer watching her breathe, watching the miracle of my daughter alive and healing and slowly becoming whole again. I thought about revenge, about justice, about the difference May had asked me to explain. Revenge would have been finding those men and making them suffer personally. Revenge would have been violence and rage and temporary catharsis that solved nothing. Justice was this, was watching them destroyed by their own crimes, was knowing they would spend years or decades in prison, their reputations shattered, their careers ended, their names synonymous with evil. Justice was May getting to grow up, getting to heal, getting to have birthday parties and friendships, and a father who would never fail her again. I stood up slowly, careful not to wake her. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Gregory Watkins sat in a cell awaiting trial. Lel Atkinson languished in a Costa Rican jail. Ronald Davenport counted the days until his own trial, knowing his life as he'd known it was over. Bradley Clean recovered from his suicide attempt, facing the reality of his choices and their consequences. And Daryl Hudson was dead, his reputation destroyed posthumously, his name a curse word in the community he'd once dominated. They'd all paid a price. Not enough, maybe. Prison was too clean, too safe, too civilized for what they'd done. But it was something. It was justice. And sometimes, I reflected, justice had to be enough, because the alternative, the consuming rage, the obsessive need for personal vengeance, the darkness that threatened to swallow me whole if I let it, that wouldn't help May heal, wouldn't make me a better father, wouldn't honor the promise I'd made to myself the night I'd carried her out of that house. My phone buzzed. A message from Vince Shepherd. Just got word. 2 more arrests today. Both teachers at Hudson's old school. Your story is still breaking cases. You should be proud. I typed back. Not my story. May's and all the other victims. I just made sure people listened. You did more than that. You gave those victims justice. That's no small thing. I didn't respond. I pocketed my phone and stood at the window a while longer, thinking about fathers and daughters, monsters and heroes, revenge and justice. And I thought about a little girl who'd sat in the rain, covered in blood, telling her father not to look inside. A little girl who'd survived the worst humanity had to offer and was slowly, painfully learning to trust the world again. She was the real hero of this story. I was just the father who refused to let her down twice. I turned away from the window and walked down the hall to my own bedroom. Tomorrow I'd take May to therapy. Tomorrow I'd review more documents from the prosecution. Tomorrow I'd continue the work of being present, being patient, being the father my daughter needed. But tonight I would sleep. And if the nightmares came, because they came for me too, replays of that phone call, of what I'd found in that house, I would remind myself of the same thing I told May. The monsters were gone. They couldn't hurt anyone anymore. And that, in the end, was victory enough. 3 years later, I stood in the back of a packed courtroom, watching the final piece of the puzzle fall into place. Gregory Watkins, the last of the network to go to trial, sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his head bowed as the jury foreman read the verdict. On count 1, possession of child sexual abuse material, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, distribution of child sexual abuse material, we find the defendant guilty. The foreman continued through 41 more counts. Guilty. Guilty. Each verdict was a nail in Watkins's coffin. And with each one, I felt a small piece of the weight I'd carried for 3 years lift from my shoulders. When it was over, when Watkins had been led away in chains to await sentencing, I walked out of the courthouse into brilliant spring sunshine. I pulled out my phone and called May. "Daddy, how did it go?" "Guilty on all counts," I said. "He'll never hurt anyone again." "Good." May's voice was stronger now, fuller, the voice of an 11-year-old who'd fought her way back from hell and emerged scarred but unbroken. "Dr. Yates says that's supposed to bring me closure. Does it?" "I don't know. Maybe." May paused. "I think closure is kind of overrated. I'm not ever going to forget what happened, but I don't think about it every day anymore. Is that the same thing?" I smiled. "Yeah, baby. I think that's exactly the same thing." "Cool. Hey, Daddy, can Emma sleep over tonight? We're working on a project for science class. And of course, I'll pick up pizza for dinner." "Thanks. Love you, Daddy." "Love you too, sweetheart." I ended the call and stood there for a moment, marveling at the normalcy of that conversation. A girl asking about sleepovers and science projects. A father agreeing to pizza. The mundane, beautiful reality of a life that had been shattered and slowly, painstakingly pieced back together. The last 3 years hadn't been easy. May had good days and bad days, progress and setbacks. There had been panic attacks at school, night terrors that left her screaming for hours, therapy sessions where she couldn't stop crying or couldn't speak at all. But there had also been breakthroughs. The first time we'd laughed at a stupid joke. The first sleepover she'd agreed to attend. The first time she'd called me from school just to chat. Not because she was having a crisis. The slow accumulation of normal moments that meant healing was happening, even if it was happening in fits and starts. I had been there for all of it. Every therapy session, every school event, every 2 a.m. nightmare. I'd rearranged my entire life around May's needs, taking a demotion at work to accommodate the flexible schedule her healing required. I'd learned to recognize her triggers, to give her space when she needed it, and presence when she needed that instead. And I'd learned to let go of the rage that had consumed me in those first months, of the obsessive need to personally punish every person who'd ever enabled Daryl Hudson's crimes, of the fantasy of revenge that had sometimes felt more appealing than the difficult, unglamorous work of actually being present for my daughter. Justice had been served. Not perfectly, maybe, not completely, but enough. Watkins would die in prison, his sentence consecutive terms totaling over 300 years. Lel Atkinson had received 47 years after fighting extradition for 18 months. Ronald Davenport was serving 25 years, having taken a plea deal to avoid trial. And the others, the dozen men whose names had emerged from the expanding investigation. They'd all faced consequences, too. Some were in prison. Some had lost their careers. Some had fled the country and lived as fugitives. The network had been destroyed, not by my personal vengeance, but by the exposure of truth, by the courage of multiple victims who'd come forward after May's story broke, by prosecutors who'd built meticulous cases, by a justice system that, for once, had actually worked. I walked to my car, thinking about that night 3 years ago when I'd composed the email to Vince Shepard. When I'd chosen justice over revenge, exposure over violence, truth over silence. It had cost me. The settlement money had evaporated. Bradley Clean's offer had been withdrawn the moment the story went public. I had spent tens of thousands on legal fees, security, relocation costs. I'd been sued by 2 of the men I'd exposed, frivolous lawsuits that had ultimately been dismissed, but still required expensive legal defense. But I'd do it all again without hesitation. Because May was alive. May was healing. May had friends and interests and a future that wasn't defined solely by what had been done to her. That was the only victory that mattered. I drove home through the city, spring flowers blooming in the parks I passed, thinking about fathers and daughters, and the kinds of men who deserved the title. Thinking about the difference between justice and revenge, between punishment and healing. When I got home, May was in her room with Emma. The 2 of them bent over a poster board covered in diagrams of the solar system. They looked up when I knocked on the open door. "Pizza should be here in 30 minutes, I said. "Perfect. Thanks, Mr. Ogden." Emma was a cheerful girl with bright red hair and more freckles than face. She'd been the first kid at May's new school to reach out, to see past the quiet new girl who flinched at loud noises. They'd been inseparable since. "You need anything else?" "Nope, we're good." May smiled at me, that gap-toothed smile I'd been terrified I'd never see again. "Oh, Daddy, I forgot to tell you. I got my essay back from Mrs. Peterson. I got an A+. That's wonderful. What was the essay about?" May's smile flickered slightly. "Heroes. Real ones, not like superheroes. I wrote about you." My throat tightened. "May, I'm not." "Yes, you are." May's voice was firm. Mrs. Peterson said it was the best essay in the class. She said I should consider entering it in the district writing contest. "What did you say about me?" "That you're the kind of hero who doesn't wear a cape or have superpowers. You're the kind who shows up every day and does the hard work of keeping people safe. The kind who believes victims, even when it's complicated. The kind who makes sure bad guys face consequences, even when it's easier to stay quiet." May paused. "I also wrote about how you taught me that healing is harder than revenge, but more important." I had to look away, blinking back tears. "You're the brave one, sweetheart. All you did was everything." May crossed the room and hugged me. "I know I don't say it enough, but thank you for everything. For believing me, for fighting for me, for being here." I held my daughter, marveling at her strength, at her capacity to trust again after every reason to never trust anyone, at her resilience and wisdom that seemed impossibly mature for an 11-year-old. "You're going to be okay," I said softly. "More than okay, you're going to be extraordinary." "I know," May said simply. "Because I have you." Emma cleared her throat awkwardly. "This is super sweet and all, but can we maybe finish the poster before the pizza comes? I'm starving." May pulled away, laughing. Emma's always hungry. It's kind of her superpower. "Hey, rude." The girls went back to their project, arguing cheerfully about whether Pluto should be included as a planet. I watched them for a moment, storing this memory alongside all the others I'd collected over the past 3 years. The ordinary moments, the proof that May was more than her trauma, that she had a life beyond what had been done to her. My phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Yates. "Heard about the Watkins verdict. How are you both doing?" I typed back. "We're good. May's having a friend over." working on a school project. Everything's normal. Normal is an underrated miracle. You should both be proud. We are. I pocketed my phone and went to the kitchen to wait for the pizza. As I stood there, looking at the ordinary clutter of my ordinary life, May's school papers on the fridge, her backpack by the door, her shoes kicked off in the hallway, I thought about the path I'd chosen 3 years ago. I could have taken the settlement money, could have stayed silent, could have moved May somewhere far away and tried to forget the whole thing ever happened. Or I could have gone the other way, could have hunted down those men personally, could have made them suffer in ways the justice system never would, could have prioritized revenge over my daughter's needs. I chosen neither. I chosen the harder path, the one that required patience and faith in a system that so often failed, the one that prioritized May's healing over my own need for satisfaction, the one that traded personal vengeance for systemic justice. And it had worked. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. The doorbell rang. I paid for the pizza and called the girls out for dinner. We ate at the coffee table in the living room, May and Emma chattering about their teachers and classmates, about the new Marvel movie they wanted to see, about whether TikTok was still cool or if it was time to move on to whatever the next app would be. Normal conversation, normal concerns, normal life. After Emma's parents picked her up, after May went to bed, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and pulled up my email. A message from Vince Shepard sat at the top of my inbox. Kenny, thought you'd want to know. The documentary about the Millbrook Network just won an Emmy. And more importantly, 3 more victims came forward this week. Cases in different states. Your decision to go public 3 years ago is still creating ripples, still bringing justice. Thank you for trusting me with the story. I read the message twice, then closed my laptop. I wasn't interested in accolades or awards. Wasn't interested in being celebrated as some kind of hero. I was just a father who'd done what any father should do, protected his child, and fought to make sure the people who'd hurt her couldn't hurt anyone else. That was all. That was everything. I stood up and walked down the hall to May's room, opening her door just enough to see her sleeping peacefully, her face relaxed. No nightmares tonight. Her clay sculpture, the lumpy horse-dog hybrid, sat on her nightstand, a reminder of that terrible phone call 3 years ago. But it was also a reminder that she'd survived, that she'd kept creating and learning and growing despite everything that had tried to break her. I quietly closed the door and walked to my own room. Tomorrow I'd take May to her soccer game. Tomorrow I'd help her practice her presentation for the writing contest. Tomorrow I'd continue the work of being present, being patient, being the father she deserved. But tonight I would rest. And if the nightmares came, because they came for me too, I would remind myself of the same thing I told May. The monsters were gone. They couldn't hurt anyone anymore. And that, in the end, was victory enough. This whole journey taught me something profound about what true strength looks like. It's not about violence or personal vendetta. It's about exposure, truth, justice. I tore down a network of predators, not with my fists, but with evidence, persistence, and the courage to make their crimes public. I ensured they would spend years or decades paying for what they'd done, that their names would be synonymous with evil, that they would never hurt another child. And I did it without becoming a monster myself, without scarring May further by modeling revenge and violence, without sacrificing my humanity to satisfy my rage. Some people might think that was weakness, that real justice required blood and pain and personal vengeance. But I knew better. The men who'd hurt my daughter were destroyed. Careers ended, reputations shattered, freedom taken, names cursed. They would spend the rest of their lives paying for their crimes. And May was free. Free to heal, free to grow, free to be more than what had been done to her. That, for me, was victory. That was strength. That was the revenge of a father who loved his daughter more than he hated her abusers. As I turned out the lights and finally, after 3 years of nightmares and hypervigilance and constant worry, allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay, I understood that this was what heroism looked like. Not dramatic confrontations or violent justice. Not revenge fantasies or personal vendettas. Just a father who showed up every day. Who chose healing over hatred. who turned his daughter's tragedy into a catalyst for systemic change that would protect countless other children. Simple, unglamorous, real, and in the end, more powerful than any revenge could ever be. What would you have done if you were in my shoes that night? Would you have taken the money or fought for justice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I really want to hear what you think.